Good afternoon, and welcome to part 3 of Futsal868's sport webinar series entitled Respecter. The series discusses the vital role sport plays in highlighting and addressing gender-based violence, with a special focus on violence against women and girls. Today, Tuesday the 10th of December, is Human Rights Day. It commemorates the anniversary of one of the world's most groundbreaking global pledges, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This landmark document enshrines the rights that everyone is entitled to as a human being, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The Declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on the 10th of December 1948 and sets out for the first time fundamental human rights to be universally protected. Today also commemorates the official end to the 16 Days of Activism and the 2024 edition of the Respecter series. In part 3, join us on stage is Dr. Katija Khan, Interim President, Coalition Against Domestic Violence, lecturer in psychology at the University of West Indies St. Augustine campus, President of the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations. With her will be Ms. Renelle White, Assistant Director of Gender Affairs under the Office of the Prime Minister. I want to say thank you very much to these wonderful ladies for taking the opportunity to be here with us on this great day. Ladies, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Geoffrey, for having me, and hello to all of your viewers and listeners.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks again, Geoffrey.
You're welcome. 16 days of activism has gone, as with everything else, so quickly. More so with it being, on the brink of the Christmas season. Do you all really think that the 16 days of activism was enough? I want to start first, before you all answer a question, I want to introduce Ms. Katija, Dr. Katija Khan. Dr. Khan, please, I would like you to let our viewers know who you are and what brings you to this table.
Sure. So, Geoffrey, in your introduction, you indicated I'm the interim president of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I've also been a director for a few years, and I'm also a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist and lecturer with the University of the West Indies, and also the president of the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations. And I work with a number of NGOs in Trinidad and Tobago as well. So you asked the question whether 16 days is enough. And let me frame it in this way. We know that domestic violence is endemic in our country. It's a massive problem. So it's a problem every single day of the year. But what these 16 days of activism allows us to do is to focus a lens on the issue and to promote more discussions and to highlight some of the priorities that we desperately need to change and to reduce the scope of this problem. So in terms of whether it's enough, it's never enough. Until this problem becomes more manageable, it will never be enough. But at least we can start with these 16 days where we try to get the whole country having conversations in every sphere that they're in. Whether you're home with your children on a Sunday afternoon, you've just had lunch and you're relaxing and you're listening to a podcast. Whether you're kicking ball in a court somewhere with your colleagues, whether in your workplace, wherever you are, we want people to have conversations about domestic violence and for them to think about what can they do in their sphere. We can all make a difference in each of our spheres.
And that's certainly what we intend to do this afternoon, have that conversation. Jumping right across to Ms. Renelle White. Ms. White, tell us a little bit about yourself. What brings you to the table and the organization you represent?
Yes, so hello again, everyone. And as Geoffrey said, I am currently the Assistant Director for the Gender Affairs Division under the Office of the Prime Minister. I haven't been in that role for quite too long. However, before joining the Gender Affairs Division, I have been a very outspoken advocate for women's rights, for women's empowerment, not only women, but also young girls. I have been involved in many NGOs as well over the years. I am a out and bad, loud and proud feminist. So I really live my life, in such a way where, I have that gendered lens on. And I really try to advocate for persons who don't have a voice, persons who are vulnerable, persons who are silenced, really. And I think so much of that is still going on today. In 2024, we mightn't think that, in 2024, we still have so many issues that women face. We still have women who face domestic violence, intimate partner violence. We have persons who are so oppressed within society and within certain communities. So there's a lot of privilege, there's a lot of entitlement in society, which has, the system the way it is. So, sometimes you think the work is done, or, you're almost at the end, but it really does not stop. And of course, the 16 days of activism, it really is an opportunity to showcase not only effective strategies, but also initiatives that shed light on this very pressing issue of gender-based violence. This year's campaign will aim to mobilize around the priorities of the Beijing Plus 30 review through emphasizing the urgency of strengthening accountability for ending violence against women. So I think it's really important that we not only look at data and statistics, but really get down a little deeper, as we were speaking earlier before we started recording, get down a little deeper and address the root causes of violence on the whole, the root causes of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And these include things that we could speak about after, from gendered expectations, gendered rules, gender stereotypes, ideas around masculinity, hypermasculinity, what a woman should be, what a man should be, emotional intelligence, cultural and patriarchal ideologies, you know? So yeah.
Renelle, I'm not going to move from you just yet. I want to stay on you for a bit. And Doc, please allow me the opportunity, because the same question is going to come to you right after. You're out and bad, as you said, Renelle, out and bad. What was the background to you being so passionate about gender equality? What if somebody was to ask you, why of all the fields you could be in, why this one? Why this lane?
Yeah. First of all, I never thought I would actually be working in my passion or in my field, because I have done it without a salary, no pay, not as work, since I was probably in university, from 19 until now. And that's a long time. I wouldn't say how long it is, but it's a long time. But this is something I could do without getting paid for doing. This is not a job for me. So I now just happen to end up having or getting a job where, yes, I'm getting a salary to do what I love, to really engage in my passion. And if I really need to go back, or have to go back to tell you where this starts, I mean, as a young girl, I didn't know what feminism was. I didn't know about women's rights and so on. You're a young person, you're a young girl, you're in primary school, kindergarten, and you don't have that language to really identify yourself. But I was always very different. They said I was rebellious. They said that I wasn't girly and whatever other adjectives to describe. But But in essence, really and truly, I never fit into that box that society likes to place young girls and women in, being quote unquote ladylike, being silent, being quiet. And my grandmother always used to say something to me. And I spoke about it last week, and I always harp back to that. She said, girls should be seen and not heard. And I was like, what does that mean? Girls should be seen and not heard. And it is a very old saying. And, you know, she meant well. It came from a good place. That is what they knew of their generation. That is what they were told, and that is how they were brought up. And it basically silences girls. You should be seen and not heard, not have a voice, be silent, do not have an opinion, don't speak loud. I was always very loud. I'm still very loud, unapologetically so. You know, so when I started university, I had, you know, academic advice and whatnot. I started my first degree in literatures and English. And, you know, walking around to pick electives and so on, I saw the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. That is my home. They have made me into the person, the feminist activist of who I am today. And I said, yeah, I'll try this course. This looks interesting. Introduction to Women's Studies. So there's a little plug for IGDS on that course. And I went to class. And I was like, wow, I am being seen and heard. This is me. You know, I identified so much with the lectures, with the lecturer, with the space. I actually felt as if I belonged somewhere and I knew who I was as a person. And from there, once you go gender, you don't go back. And my passion grew, it built. You know, I just became so much more confident in my advocacy. And yeah, I have been doing feminist activism, being a feminist on my own, living my feminist life since then until now.
Does being a feminist means that men are not allowed in your life?
Not at all, not at all. I don't have any girlfriends actually. Strangely enough. Not that I avoid or anything like that. You know, life is what it is, and you know, friendships happen and they come and they go and they expire just like relationships do. But no, definitely not. Because people, especially in the Caribbean, they fail to realize that being feminist and advocating for the cause of feminism is not an exclusive cause, but a rather very much inclusive, bringing people in rather than pushing people out. I think that's the best way that I could describe my feminism. My feminism is also Caribbean feminism. My feminism is Indo-Caribbean feminism because of an East Indian person living in the Caribbean. We have very unique perspectives and so on. So that is how I identify myself. And being Caribbean, living the Caribbean experience as a woman, as a man, the nuances are so specific to our realities, you know? So it's not like I just pull some white feminism from Europe and America and say, yeah, you know, I want to be like them. But it is homegrown. This is what we call it. It is homegrown Caribbean feminism, acknowledging what we have to contend with from colonial days. We live in a neo-colonial society. The patriarchy is wrapped up into this. What does it mean to be a Caribbean woman? What does it mean to be a Caribbean man? Issues of hyper-masculinity, the Trinidad music, you know, the Zesta life, all these different things is very gendered. Every single thing we do and how we live, we all live gendered lives. So no, I do not hate men to say it, you know, in layperson's terms. Men, of course, very welcomed and so on. And all the men in my life, I try to show that feminism is also for you. Because the root of feminism is looking at the negative consequences of the patriarchal system. And people need to know and recognize that not only are women disadvantaged under a patriarchal system, but men are as well. So when we stereotype men, oh, yeah, man, breadwinner, go there and work, you are nothing else. Feminism seeks to break that up, to allow men to come into themselves, come into emotions, come into the home, come into participating in other spheres that traditionally society has deemed not for them. So when people say, oh God, you're all about, woman power and, power over men, but it is, of course, empowering both men and women to break away or step out of tradition and step into non-traditional roles. And as a society, we need to normalize those actions. We need to normalize that movement, breaking out of those traditions, norms, expectations that are so rigid, and stepping in to just being more human. Yeah.
Dr. Khan, your turn. What was the domino effect that started your journey down this road?
I'm not sure if it was so much dominoes as just accumulation, drips throughout. I think it starts with that awareness that was also shaped at a very young age. I had a mom who encouraged us to read a lot. So libraries, books, newspapers. And so we were always very aware of what was going on in society and had an interest in that. And so the whole spate of problems that confront our society, also just through personal experience and through observing things in your community, I think you're hard pressed in society in Trinidad and Tobago to not hear of an incidents of domestic violence, whether it's in your family or it's in your community. And so I'm no different. I'm just like so many people in the country. Domestic violence has been in my sphere as a young child and throughout adulthood. I would say that secondary school and university helped to give me the mechanisms, the tools, the skills, and the confidence to act on that in formal ways. So whether it's being involved in student leadership and started my role as an advocate and then becoming a psychologist, seeing it through those lens, I must say that being on the UE campus, that really helped me in terms of forming that Caribbean identity and becoming invested in wanting to have an impact. How can I contribute to building the Caribbean? When we look at our history of slavery and indentureship, and we are still battling with the effects of decolonization. And when, you mention these topics, people think, oh, that's long in the history. Why are you talking about that now? Let's focus on 2024. But a lot of our traumas and the violence and the negative things that we see in society, some of it, and a lot of it, has its roots in our history, and we cannot ignore our history. So our trauma history is how we've dealt with violence and aggression, how have we recovered from those traumas, often shape how we function in today's society. I've been fortunate to be involved in a lot of NGOs who are doing fantastic work, like the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations, the Silver Lining Foundation, Call to Action, which is another new NGO, and of course my professional work as a psychologist, both clinically as a practitioner and through the University of the West Indies as an educator and as a researcher and as a scientist. That also gives me a platform which I try to use. I think when we have opportunities and we're in positions where we can influence others, that we need to grasp that with both hands.
I want to touch on Dr. Khan, the researcher, a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I want you to tell us a little bit as to what are the latest studies on, and it's going to be a very broad question, but help me, and we could dive into it a little bit more and more. What are the latest studies as regards to domestic violence in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean? What has it been showing? What is the latest trends, statistics? Talk me through some of the things that research is revealing.
Sure. So some years ago, Geoffrey, there was a study done, and it was funded by the IDB, and it found that 1 in every 3 of ever partnered women, so 1 in every 3 women who had ever had a significant other, whether they were married, it was a boyfriend, they were in a relationship of some kind, 1 in every 3 of those women would have experienced violence at the hands of a partner and someone they knew in that intimate partner relationship dynamic. And that's a really startling statistic, Because what that means is that all of us will know somebody. It's 1 in every 3. It's a third of our female population who's been in relationships. And so that statistic also reflects what's been noted globally. So we're talking about a problem that exists not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the Caribbean and internationally as well. So that was very interesting, and that allowed us to understand a little bit more about the size and scope of the problem that we're dealing with and how widespread it is. Now, CADV, and with the data that's coming through our psychosocial unit, and this is the unit where we have counselors and social workers who work with victims and survivors who reach out to CADV. And so these persons who reach out to us, they are able to access services like counseling, case management, psychosocial support. So if they need shelter, if they need resources, if they need legal assistance, we're able to provide support or refer them to sources of support. And so we have been collating data on that and starting to analyze that data. And what we are seeing is that this issue of domestic violence, and we heard about this gendered lens. It is largely a gendered issue. Many times, and those of us who are familiar with the work of domestic violence, we're in spaces and we talk about women, and people say, well, you're only talking about women, but what about men? Aren't men affected as well? And the response I would give to that, and many have given, is that yes, we know men are affected as well. But when we look at the problem, and I'll speak specifically with our CADV data, we are seeing that approximately 90% of the persons who reach out to us are women, right? They are women who are the victims. And so when you are trying to figure out how to deal with a problem, a lot of times you have to prioritize who you should give assistance to. And for domestic violence, we know that the majority of victims are women and children. What we've also found is that these women are subject to not just one type of abuse. Yeah. So when we ask, it's multiple sources. It's poly abuse. So it's the physical, the psychological, the mental, the financial, the economic, the sexual. It's multiple types of abuse that these women are being subjected to. Also, people have these ideas about who experiences domestic violence, like as a certain type of person from a certain type of background and a certain type of household. And what we know is that no, it's all backgrounds. All backgrounds, whether you only finish primary school or whether you have plenty degrees, women of all backgrounds are affected. Yeah? We know that the majority of these women, over 80% of these women who reached out had a child, had at least one child. So we know that it's not just the individual who is the victim. Families are victims, children are victims of violence, whether they are directly the victims of abuse or whether they're in a household where they're witnessing that abuse with their parents or with their mommy. So this data helps us to get a better idea of what this problem is and who we need to target. One of the things we want to do is also collect data on perpetrators, because if we talk about tackling domestic violence, yes, we want to focus on prevention. That's very important. So there are all these things about reducing the violence, but we also need to talk about rehabilitating perpetrators, because many of them will not be brought to justice for many different reasons. They will continue to live in the same households. Many of them, even if they are brought to justice, they will go back to their households and their communities. What then? So they are not rehabilitated just by having served a prison sentence. So we have to be a lot more proactive, and we cannot continue to avoid them and to point them out and say, and pain. We have to figure out how can we support perpetrators, give them hold them accountable. Yes, very much so, but give them the interventions they need so that they could go back now and be responsible citizens who are not inflicting trauma on their previous victims or a new set of victims. I'll pause there, Geoffrey.
1 in 3. And that is 1 in 3 reported cases.
Yes.
So therefore, we have a situation of underreporting as well. And this underreporting makes it difficult to accurately assess the scale of the problem. Am I correct in saying that, Renelle?
Yes, yes, you are correct. But let me just add, seeing that we are speaking about statistics and data, at the Office of the Prime Minister, this week or next week, we should be launching something called the Central Registry on Domestic Violence, which is basically a digital platform or digital interface where all the data, the reporting, and so on from TTPS, from the national hotline, from NGOs, and so on, would be actually compiled and collated and put on that system so we could get a better, more accurate snapshot where we could observe patterns, trends, and just really record data properly so no one gets left behind or no one falls through the cracks. Because a lot of times people do fall through the cracks. And like Dr. Khan said, they go back to their old, violent ways. Sometimes victims as well may feel, re-traumatized. They may feel like if the process is too difficult, and they may go back and continue facing that violence and abuse and not report it again. So we have cases like that. It's so layered. There's so many issues and complexities surrounding domestic violence from the perpetrator side, from the victim side, and we need to understand that complexity, understand these layers, and not just look at it and say things like, "Oh, why she don't just leave? Oh gosh, she's an educated woman. She could get up and leave. She have somewhere else to go." We need to understand, and I know that Dr. Khan would speak more about that, the psychological and the emotional hurt and trauma and issues that arise when it comes to women leaving situations like that, or maybe leaving and going back to situations like that.
I want to speak more to through the cracks. Tell me more of what that means. Break it down for the man on the street. What does it mean through the cracks, and what does it mean by layers? Help me understand that some more, guys.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I could start a little bit, and Dr. Khan could, of course, jump in and continue where you feel necessary. Um, so, of course, with any experience or anything that our individual experiences, it's not just an experience as a man or as a woman, but it is an experience as a mother, a daughter, a woman. Yes. Wherever you're working, your job position, your title, basically what I'm trying to say is that as human beings, our identity isn't single. We do not live single issue lives either. We have various different layers and factors to who we are. And this then goes on to contribute to how we experience life. And in this case, we are speaking about domestic violence in particular, right? Um, and of course, the persons who are involved in the situation, they as well, layers and so on. And one of these layers is childhood experience. I'm not a psychologist. Of course, Dr. Khan could feel free to talk about that after because I think I would like her to speak to that. I would really like her to speak to how we disregard and say, "Oh God, you grew up from that. You're not a little child again. You get licks when you were small. You had a hard life. Why is it free?" How much that impacts who we are today, how significantly it impacts who we are today, how significantly it impacts violence in our society, how it impacts how women take hits, take blows, take violence, because that is how they were grown up. They have seen their parents go through that. They themselves have been victims as a child. Oh gosh, you had to give the child some licks. Nothing wrong with beating them. Discipline, right? Punishment as licks. I am definitely not an advocate for beating children, for hitting, giving children licks as punishment or for disciplining them, because the psychological impacts is really debilitating on a person's mental state as they grow into adulthood. We are living in a society with adults walking around married with children, holding jobs, having high positions, walking around with trauma, with unhealed childhood trauma. And a lot of times, that unhealed childhood trauma, part of the layers, is what contributes to them not being able to have a proper relationships, not being able to have proper conflict resolution, not being able to have or gain a level of emotional intelligence, right? To have proper healthy as opposed to toxic relationships in society. And a lot of times we see people resolving conflict by, we have road rage. Somebody give you a bad drive, you want to come out and chop them up and kill them and curse and get on and so on. From road rage straight up to intimate partner relationships, we resolve conflict as a culture through violence and aggression, and it is normalized. So that is something that we are tasked with at the Office of the Prime Minister, shifting not only our preventative activities and initiatives, not only grants and funding that we give to women to bring them out of situations and help them be financially independent, but we are tasked with that that role. We are given that role and that task of working with NGOs and other CSOs to shift that culture, to change that mindset, to create a society where it's okay to go for counseling. It's okay to talk about your issues. It's okay to, bring up things. Say you didn't like when, you was being hit as a child. Say you want, feeling hurt about something and need to cry it out. Not go by the bar and drink your issues or problems away, because it remains and then it comes out. So you go back home, your wife is vulnerable, your children, abuse, So in a very layperson's or easy way, not a psychological way, I've said it, I don't know if I did, but I definitely see it. We see it all the time, and people need to understand this root. It's not just a man just get up one day and feel to be violent and I say, right, I am going to abuse my wife and my significant other. It is so much deeper. And when we understand the root, we could have empathy for the victim and the survivor. We could also have empathy and understanding for the perpetrator and where they are coming from and what they need to heal and be better, kinder, more loving and empathetic persons in society.
Well, let me add to that. I mean, Renelle has left us with some very powerful statements. This issue of falling through the cracks and how things do not get recognized and labeled for what they are. It occurs on many different levels. So if we start with that, let's start with that individual and interpersonal, in your home, in your family, your community, and what kinds of values and norms get normalized. So the things that you do accept. So, often when we have a conversation about corporal punishment in Trinidad and Tobago, right? Joffrey, and I want you to listen to this. If we were having a conversation about corporal punishment and we polled many people in our society, you know what they would say? Bring back licks. The children need licks. Look at all the violence in the schools. Yes. They need good licks. They should have never taken away the licks. Don't listen to them psychologists. They don't know what they're talking about, all this soft thing. But we don't make the connection. When we teach children, because of course children learn not just arithmetic and maths and language and science, they learn by observing and they model the adults around them. So what this overuse of licks as a disciplinary tactic results in is that they learn that we use aggression and violence to solve problems, right? So why then are we surprised that we have this epidemic of violence in relationships as adults? There is no magic switch that gets flipped when you reach an adult to say, oh, well, if I get vexed and jealous and angry, I shouldn't lash, beat, and cuff down and insult and push and shove, etc.
So, Doc, I have my hands up. Okay. Because you're very good. Let me ask you this question, because you have the religious folks who are going to say to you, and my dad is one of them, he's going to come and say, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Okay, wait, let me respond.
I comment here. You have the old schoolers who are saying, licks never kill me, and look how good I turn out.
Yeah.
Right? But as I learned
They don't understand.
some years ago that when it is you take something out, you need to replace it with something better, right? Am I correct?
Yes.
So if corporal punishment was taken out, did we find the correct replacement?
Let's talk about it. First, let me address the two examples you raised because they are very valid examples. People bring them up all the time. Let's start with the rod of correction. Let me give a caveat. I am not a religious scholar. I'm not a biblical scholar. But what I would say is, why do we assume and interpret a rod of correction to mean licks? Have you ever seen a shepherd beat his sheep into compliance when he's trying to guide them along a path? When we see farmers herding their goats to walk home or herding their cows to walk home, do we see them beating them and buffing them, or do they use the rod of correction to guide? So let us revisit that term. There's no translation that said correction mean beat them. And when I talk about physical punishment, I'm talking about the overuse, because most people don't know how to give physical punishment effectively. Oftentimes people do it when they're angry, and oftentimes the punishment is very abusive. I'm also a consultant with the Children's Authority, and the Children's Authority they have the statistics on the amount of physical abuse that's visited upon children and how horrific it is. Pot, spoon, electrical cable, things that inflict serious physical injury on children. So let's revisit that idea of the use of physical punishment and what the rod of correction really means. Let me jump to the second one. I get licks and I didn't turn out bad. How you know that? How you know? How you know? How you know how you affect? We usually assume.
I make jail, doc. I make jail.
So if that's the standard, then we need to revisit the standard. And I would say that, yes, some people would get their smack and their lash, but that's a biased sample. Using yourself as an example, that's very biased. The professionals who work in this field, we see the outcome of children who have been physically abused. We know that the trauma it inflicts takes years of undoing, and oftentimes we do not have the resources, and those children will not get the interventions they need to undo the licks. So we need to have more conversations about it and connect the two dots. Connect that if we are promoting physical discipline and violence as a means of helping shape problem solving, what do we expect adults to do if they've never learned anything differently? You asked about what do we replace it with. There are many things we can replace it with. And we've heard in all of your discussions, you would have heard, about conflict resolution, problem solving, how to have difficult conversations, how to deal with your stress, how to deal with your frustration in a healthy way, how to deal with conflict in relationships. So let's say it's your job that's stressing you out, or it's finances, and then you come home and then the home situation stressing you out. How do you have good, healthy coping mechanisms? And here I could throw in a plug for sport one time, because sports provides so many avenues and has such a great potential by which we can help tackle this big problem of domestic violence. So Geoffrey, you're a baller, you're a footballer? Right. So when you want to get if a man in your way, you just kick him down and cuff him down and push him out of the way, what will happen?
Get a red card.
One time. So what
exactly
is it teaches you how to navigate and problem solve in ways that are healthy and prescribed. So it helps people values and skills, and you can do this from young. So from interventions of sport with young children in schools or in communities, all the way up to adulthood, because you'll get that card whether you're a 7-year-old who kicked down somebody or a 47-year-old who kicked down somebody. But here's the thing about this sporting arena and how sport is in Trinidad and Tobago. When we think about not only formal sport, but just how most people play sport. On a weekend, on an evening, they get together with people they know and they kick ball. So it could be an informal league or tournament, etc. And that is not just about the sport. They lime before and they lime after. And what that does is it creates such invaluable spaces to have important conversations. Let's have conversations about what consent really is about. Let's have conversations about the rape culture. When I tell people Trinidad has a rape culture, they're like, what you talking about? Ugh. Because people think that rape is just about the act of rape, and it's not. A rape culture promotes gender-based violence through a number of means. When we make all these jokes and statements and the locker room talk, we objectify women and we victim blame. So she looked for that, what she was doing there, why was she wearing that, who tell her to go there at 6 o'clock in the evening, what she expect. All of those things contribute to a rape culture that normalizes gender-based violence. When we focus more on blaming the victim rather than holding perpetrators accountable, that promotes a rape culture. And all of these things now, if you have a society that jokes more about it and victim blames more about it, what you find is that it shapes a culture that then becomes one that is not responsive enough to domestic violence. So I started off by telling you about the layers. I said family and community, but then let me just add the other two layers. So our workplaces, our institutions, so whether it's a sporting institution, whether it's your workplace or a formal entity, those are also environments where culture is shaped. And then we have the top level now where we talk about the legislation and the role of the state and its duty to protect. So all of those are ways that if we don't have the right things in place, that's where we see people falling through the cracks. Because all of those levels should be working in tandem to support women, children, victims of all kinds. Yeah? So that's why the cracks are there, Geoffrey. We have a lot of work to do at all those levels still. Good work is taking place, but we're far short of our goals.
You hit a very important note for which I smiled because it was serious. I hope that person, when one person saw me smile, it wasn't because I was smiling, because it was serious when you talk about rape. But you spoke about harmful gender norms and stereotypes. I want to delve into that a little bit more, because one person is to understand what we are doing wrong, and not because it is normal means it is right. And then after, I want us to go into what is the government doing and can do more of, if I may, right? So Doc, I'll go to you. Can you drill down a little more as regards to gender norms and what exists and what should not be there?
Oh boy, so that's a whole chapter, verse, and thesis. But let me strike it right. Just some of them, and Renelle mentioned some of them already. The expectations that we have about gendered roles and how little girls and young women should comport themselves as opposed to how men should comport themselves. There's so many layers and levels to that. But much of it places a lot of focus on women as being responsible, not only for their own actions, but somehow responsible for the actions of others. So if I wear a dress that you think invokes a certain reaction in you as a male, somehow I, the woman, am responsible for that, and I'm also responsible for all of the consequences that come with that. So there is a huge double standard and a huge burden that's placed on women to have to be responsible and carry the responsibility for everybody in society. And that it's not focused on protecting women. It's focused on somehow holding them accountable and asking them to be better, because we have this idea of purity and virginity, and therefore there are certain things that you should not be doing, so whether it's what you wear or what you're doing, where you're going, what time you're staying out. So this tendency to judge women, there is a huge discrepancy when we talk about how we judge men and how we judge women. Now, on the other hand, let me talk a little bit about men, because I think at the same time, while there is all of this toxic masculinity that I really do empathize with men because society puts them in a tough place. We want them to be protectors. We want them to be responsible and provide. And we don't want them to be sensitive and vulnerable. And how is any human being supposed to cope with that? We put men in a very difficult place when we do not give them the tools that they need to manage their emotions and also to reconcile these huge responsibilities that society places on them. We don't do men any justice when we do not hold them accountable for their behaviors, that you are accountable for your behavior. If you are an adult man, there's nothing a 12-year-old girl could do that makes her responsible for your behavior. Yeah. So we also need to start. I have a colleague who says we need to call men out, but we also need to call them in. So call them out and hold them accountable, but also call them in so we can have the conversations. We can talk about their vulnerabilities and their challenges with navigating their roles in society. We need to talk to young men about the challenges they have in navigating this role of, how to be the cool fella and the girls man in the group while still respecting girls and women while trying to seek the regard of your peers. Again, I talk about these homosocial spaces that sports facilitates. And when I say that word, usually antenna goes up because they're like homosocial. That's someone like homosexual. What's she talking about there? What I mean by that is that sports usually facilitate spaces where genders are on their own. Yeah? So for a lot of sports groups, it's just the fellas. If you're kicking ball, it's just you and the fellas. So it provides these opportunities for just men to interact. So even if it's on your WhatsApp group, so maybe a football group has a WhatsApp group. When you look at the kinds of things, oftentimes it's not just football they're talking about. So the next time somebody shares a picture or video, and you know what I'm talking about, who is the person that's going to step up and say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you sharing that here? You have permission to share that? The person know you're sharing that? So we could also, what we need to teach as well? How to call out people. Sometimes people know a behavior is not right, but they don't know how to hold their brethren accountable. They don't know how to call out somebody, especially if they're not as close to them or there's a power difference. They don't know how to navigate those conversations. So we need to equip men, women, girls, and boys with those skills to have these conversations.
Powerful. I want to push the envelope a little more.
Okay.
How our ladies dress for parties. How do we get our men to accept the beauty of a woman without turning it into something more than that?
Oh, so that has multiple layers. Let me start and I'll pass that back.
And I had to go there. Because as you said, it's brought into the WhatsApp group, and that's known as private, right? Yeah. We don't speak about it openly.
You're right? Quite right.
And the interesting thing about it, Doc and Renelle, is that every single year, the attire of women in and around Carnival, as a matter of fact, it doesn't matter about in and around Carnival, is becoming less and less. But that does not, and for what everything we have spoken about in the last 49 minutes, I can't believe it has passed so quickly. Means that we need to have respect for a woman. There's no reason, but yet it is, we have again the norms, as in, you didn't see what she was wearing or so there. Yeah. I just a man, my blood hot. Right. What happened to you, Dread? You go, she didn't see. And the conversations can go on. So how do we train our men, Doc?
First, let's start. Let's start with some facts. If the amount of clothes you wore was related to the likelihood of you being raped, then we would expect to see high levels of sexual assault in societies and cultures and tribes where they tend to wear less clothing. But we know that doesn't hold up. We would expect to see a lot of sexual assault in places like beaches where people are wearing less clothes. So we know it's not that simple. It is never about what somebody is wearing or how much of something they're wearing. There are a lot of powerful art installations and discussions and coverages where they show displays of what sexual assault victims were wearing when they were assaulted. And I assure you, Geoffrey, in most of those occasions, it's not a skimpy outfit. It's the pajamas of a 4-year-old girl. It's the nightie of a 70-year-old granny. It's the full work outfit of somebody who was just coming home from work. So first, let us dispel the notion that the clothes are responsible or that the person wearing the clothes is responsible. Let me also put another layer on it. If it was about clothes, we like to think that men have this sexuality that cannot be denied.
Doc, hold 1 second.
Yeah.
I want that to soak in.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That is exceptionally brilliant. Because you have twisted my mind in what...
Say it again. Repeat it again.
I mean,
yeah.
Because
say it, put them in the back.
So many, I mean, as it is simple, but it is profound at the same time. It is extremely profound, what you just said, Doc.
And it's the truth.
We need to talk more about it. And I understand people respond to that. And I'll tell you what, we need to be able to have the conversations like this, but also follow through. So what is the thing that will make you think, well, it do apply in this situation? So you go to a party, so people drinking. It's in the nighttime. We winding up. She in this skimpy outfit. I become aroused, right? So now we might think those are extenuating circumstances. But then again, let me first put the gendered lens. I was starting to say that we somehow think that men have this sexuality that is uncontrollable, right? And that once the dominoes, that chain of dominoes starts, there's no way to stop it. And we perpetuate that idea. We perpetuate this idea that men are helpless and there's nothing they can do. But don't you think that women have sexuality too? You don't think women have desire? When I go in a fete and I see a real handsome, looking good, attractive, and I watching him, when I see Kes on stage or Marshall on stage, you don't think I say, wow, look at that man? But what do? Do I then feel that somehow I know I'm entitled to some sort of interaction with that person? Or if I'm dancing with a fella and I want to take it further and he doesn't, I somehow hold him responsible because we already gone this far, you can't pull back now. So somehow we perpetuate the idea that men are these creatures with these incessant sex drives. Now, let me not deny the role of biology. I do agree that hormones like testosterone does fuel the sex drive and that men do experience some elements of it different than women. But overlaying all of that is your own personal responsibility. Geoffrey, men know when they don't want to take things further, you know. When the woman is not attractive to them, no matter what she's wearing, are they somehow pulled along by this unconscious, invisible force? No. So men know exactly when they respond. And so it's also men's responsibility to act on that and to regulate yourself and to be self-aware. That if you see somebody in a party or if you started having interactions, you all are kissing, you all are interacting and you want more, but she says no, the responsibility is yours. It might be frustrating, but the responsibility is yours. We could also teach men how to handle that. So I don't know about your viewership, but let me be really blunt, if I could use a very blunt colloquial term that often gets used. You know, men talk about blue balls as if somehow this is some fatal affliction that is the worst thing that could befall. But
and Doc, for those who are viewing, and because we do have persons from outside of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean who view on a regular basis, so be free to explain to them what we as Trinbagonians referred to as blue balls.
Joffrey, I feel like I should ask you, as a gentleman on the panel, to probably give that explanation. But it's that sexual frustration when you become very aroused and then you have no opportunity for release.
Yes, correct. That's correct. Yes.
Right. And so the idea then that somehow the other person is now entitled to solve that issue for you, it's just also perpetuating so many very negative concepts of power, control, intimidation, coercion, force, entitlement. And so if it is that we need to also teach men and boys how to understand what's going on in their body and how to get control over it and how to channel it through healthy ways. Yeah. So sometimes you're frustrated taking a run or engaging in some exercise or go and sweat on the field. That can help you displace some of that energy. Yeah. So we need to start to help people, men, women, and children, because there are a lot of women who also reinforce some of these negative behaviors, because it's become the societal reinforced, not just by men, but by women as well. Some mothers do this with their sons. So I want us to make sure that we're not just pointing a finger here. This is a problem that all of us need to take responsibility for and examine our roles, all of our roles. Do we implicitly perpetuate some of these norms? So are some women saying, watch what she was wearing, she looked for that because there's something you don't like about that girl. So this is now your opportunity in a very, very negative and dysfunctional way to apportion blame to this victim. So yes, lots to unpack. Let me hand over to Renelle.
It's very much lots to unpack. But before we go, before we continue, I should say, guys, I really think that we need to do another part because again, I can't believe that it is 58 minutes and counting, right? A continuation of it. I want to lock you all in on air before we could be able to plan something into the new year. But Renelle, continue as you have a lot to say to what has been spoken to by Doc.
Yeah, I mean, it like Dr. Khan said, it's so many things. Where do we start? Where do we take the conversation? And I mean, she had a lot to say and a lot to share. And all of what she said, I agree with. There's nothing that I disagree with. I share the sentiments. Totally understand, what she was saying, where she's coming from. And I just want to add, just to add a little bit, because I know we're on time and all of that too. That together with all the points that she mentioned about sexual violence, we need to remember that key concept: sexual violence, rape, sexual abuse. It is never about sex itself, but so much more about power and control, right? So we need to keep that in mind. And a lot of times, men who may not have power, even women sometimes, that sense of control, autonomy, power in their own lives, at work, at home, they often look for situations or realize, hey, I'm in a situation where there's a vulnerability and I can now display that power and regain that control that I don't feel like I have at home, like I don't feel like I have in my workplace or my personal lives. So I think so much of looking at sexual violence and sexual abuse is looking at how can we, in a healthy, of course, in a healthy way, how can we empower women and girls, men and boys, so that they do not feel emasculated, powerless, not in control, but that they feel that sense of autonomy, that sense of confidence, that sense of self-esteem, that sense of value and sense of worth in their lives. A lot of times too, girls may not feel empowered enough to stand up for themselves, They may not want certain things or certain situations, and they are not empowered to say no, right? The NGO that I work with, the Silver Lining Foundation, we have done some studies and so on in the past with school age students, and I always use this example because it is so striking. I think it was the 2016, we did two surveys, 2016, 2019. The 2016 survey that looked at school age students' experiences in school, in the school environment. One of the statistics showed that a high percentage, I can't remember exactly what, but it was a high percentage of girls were not aware or did not even know if what they experienced was sexual violence or being molested. They couldn't tell the difference. It was so normalized in society that school aged girls could not tell the difference. I don't know if it was sexual abuse. I don't know if I was being molested or feel up or touch up against my will. I mean, why? Because that's how they operate in school. That's how the boys operate. So they were not taught to identify. And from a young age in primary school, Break the Silence Project teaches good touch, bad touch, right? Now we need to teach and empower young people through language. What is good touch? What is bad touch? How to speak of your violation, and also to the other side, teach persons who may be perpetrators to respect each other, respect bodies, have boundaries, and not continue perpetuating this entitlement. Right? We live in a society where people feel entitled. Simple thing as just passing and touching your hair or squeezing your shoulder or something like that. You know, not everyone might like that. We could start with very simple ways, right? Very simple ways to teach consent, bodily autonomy, boundaries, and that could filter in to understanding that dynamic with sexual violence and sexual abuse, right? So yeah, it was striking. They didn't know. They couldn't tell the difference. They were unsure. They were unsure. They ticked that box. Unsure if what I experienced was sexual violence. Unsure if what I experienced was me being molested and sexually abused in school, because it's such a normal thing, especially in co-ed schools, for boys to touch up girls, feel them up, do this, do that, take you in a corner here, there, and whatever. And of course, teenagers, I am not desexualizing teenagers at all, but we need to teach them how to be responsible, how to understand, of course, what's going on physiologically, what's going on in your bodies and whatnot, and how to really um, push or advocate for a good, healthy sexual education in our schools, because it goes down to that. It comes right back to having proper sexual education in schools, from primary school to secondary school, age appropriate, of course, where we not only teach about sex and the physiology, but you teach about things like emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, consent. Consent is sexy. I remember years ago I did an activist thing in Brian Lara Promenade, and that was one of the signs we had, right? Because people feel like, oh God, I'm going to ask you, you're breaking the vibes. I'm going to ask you if I could dance on you or dance with you. I'm going to ask you this, I'm going to ask you that. But we need to show that, hey, consent is sexy, right? Women have autonomy over their bodies. And we live in a society where we take away women's autonomy of their own bodies and themselves, where men feel like they need to be the ones in control from the father, go to the boyfriend, go to the husband, and that's how it goes, right? Women's bodies are still seen as something to possess. And we have a culture of relationships in Trinidad where it's very possessive. We have a lot of data around stalking, a lot of data around cyber stalking on social media. Don't post up this picture, don't post up that, I know you're talking to this one and that one. It's very possessive and it's very unhealthy. And those things are red flags. We talk about red card, I get a red card. These are red flags at women. And men, people need to recognize when getting into relationships, because most times, if not all times, the emotional and psychological red flags lead to physical and sexual abuse. The data shows this, right? I also just wanted to just mention, because we were talking about red card, the red card thing. years ago at UE 2017, I believe, I think it was International Men's Day. Some young people and a young researcher in particular who was affiliated with the IGDS, he did an activity called Red Card, just like the football red card rape culture, to call that red card for rape culture. And he did it with men and boys, well, young men in university. I believe it was Canada Hall in particular, where they were called to engage in. I'll read a little piece of it here. They wanted to really ensure that there was that space for men to learn about rape culture, because sometimes in their lives it goes so unnoticed and they don't even know that being a man, engaging in masculinity with other fellas, and they don't even recognize for themselves and know that, hey, there's a kind of rape culture perpetuating here, boy. So it was really to educate them and for them to recognize, so they could call it out. Like Dr. Khan said, they could in their spaces say, hey, partner, that real out of time in. Fellas, call it out. Pull up your brethren, right? I had a big sign. It's in my trunk in the car. I was going to put it up behind here. But fellas, pull up your brethren. Call it out. Call out other fellas, right? Say that real out of time in. What's wrong with you? Don't shame men for being kind and loving and quiet and empathetic. Shame men if you want to do it, and call them out for being abusive, for perpetuating the culture, because we need to shift that paradigm. And as women and as feminists, I could open that space. I could provide a space. I could educate you as an educator. We could do our work from the government side. Sensitization, action plans. We have a national strategic action plan against gender-based violence and sexual violence. But men need to speak to other men, because the dynamic of masculinity and homosocial enactment, they listen to each other. Right? We know that is what it is. Men listen to other men. That male space, you're liming by the block, you're liming on the corner, you're in the bar, you're in the barber shop. We had a barber shop initiative. So when you bring me back next time, we could talk about all these things that the government has been doing to try to shift that culture. It's very hard. It is hard, but it is happening, and we need to continue. You can't stop it. And I must also say, to just end here, that we have hope. Hope is not lost, because the younger generation, I love young people. Young people are the future of the nation. They have a sort of innocence and enthusiasm and bright-eyedness that we could hone and we could guide. We're talking about a rod of correction that we could guide. And young people have definitely been breaking that generational curse, that generational trauma, and being different from who their parents and their grandparents were. And I must commend them, and we have to continue engaging with our young people to help and support them in breaking that generational trauma and healing away from that for a better society.
You know, when I was put on to the assistant, when I heard that the assistant director for the gender affairs division was coming on, I was looking for a much older woman. I must admit that. And to meet you now, Renelle, and see the energy and the amount of things that your division and the office of the Prime Minister is doing, I am blessed.
Appreciate
I am blessed to know that that we are in good hands. I've met Doc before, so it's really amazing to be able to over the last 3 episodes, 9 brilliant minds who, and I'm speaking from Trinidad and Tobago to Barbados to United Kingdom, who are all in their different parts of the vineyard, toiling to be able to end violence against women and girls. Time has flew past. I haven't gotten to speak on impact on mental health, intersectionality and marginalization. I mean, and if it is, I drop those 2 gems in there, I know that could take us another 45 minutes. So, but with that being said, I ask for the commitment of you 2 ladies to join us
Good.
to start a new year with the continuation of it. And as I would have shared with you all before the start of this, Respect Her came about, moved from anger, and as you all mentioned before, learn how to channel your anger to this positive outcome, where we're going to have one show, just one show, and it has morphed to now 3 going on 4. Ladies, it has been an utmost pleasure, and I open the floor for you all to share with us one thing that you would have wanted to speak to today that time did not allow us to do such. So first I go with Renelle, and then Doc, you do your closing remarks. So Renelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your kind words and your appreciation of who I am as a person, and what I could bring to the gender affairs division. I really did appreciate it. It was very heartfelt. And yes, I would be happy to be back in the new year. But like I said, when I spoke before, the last thing I said, I would have really liked to show or speak about the outreach that the Gender Affairs Division does from the Office of the Prime Minister. We have one gender training officer, just one, but he does so much work around the country when it comes to gender sensitization, the very same or similar way you would get that education about understanding the roots and the basic foundations of gender-based violence, domestic violence, masculinity, and so on, at the university level. And I have been helping him along the way and doing some sensitization with him. And the feedback that we have gotten from private organizations, CSOs, and NGOs, it is really really heartfelt and really overwhelming. And just like you, they always ask us, come again, do it with some other members of staff. So I see that people are really being so much more open to wanting to understand and hear more about gender and gender dynamics and whatnot. And I would have really liked to share a little bit more about the outreach and also to this very important document called the National Strategic Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Sexual Violence, because I think it is very addressing or getting to the roots and ending at some point GBV as well as sexual violence. So yeah, I would have liked to share a little bit more about that, so we could talk about that next time. But that NSAP, if any of you all are curious, it is on our website, opm/gca.gov.tt. Feel free. We have a lot of information on the website. Feel free to check it out, read it up for yourself. It's very user-friendly, very easy to read. We also have an Instagram page that you all could follow. Look at me making social media plugs for the Gender Affairs Division, in 2024, right? I didn't think 10 years ago we would be doing these things for your government and ministry. But we have to keep with the times. And they know that. And they know that's where the young people are. You meet them where they are. So follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, Gender Affairs Division. Learn more, hear more, keep up with what we're doing. Come out when we have forums and rallies and stuff like that. And be part of, as citizens, engage with your government. Hold your government accountable. And I'm not saying this out of turn, but our minister, the Honorable Ayanna Webster Roy, she has stood up on platforms, given speeches, and said, hold your government accountable. Right? So on behalf of her, I'm repeating or reiterating, young people, citizens, people looking and listening, hold your government accountable. Tell us what you need and what you want so we could better serve you as a community, as a population, as Trinidad and Tobago.
Renelle, you know what? I think there's no better time than now to at least share with us two of the initiatives that you all have done. I think it's important. I don't want us to go into the Christmas. You'll be back. Yes, we know that already, but we are here now. Please share it with us, because I think it's also important for persons to know what is happening, because it can save a life. It can make a difference, and that's why we're here.
Right. Okay, no problem. So I will look at probably the last two things that we did launch, or that we did, the initiatives. So for 16 days of activism, we were given the task by the minister herself. She really wanted us to have 3 national youth rallies, one in North, one in South, and as well as Tobago. And the whole point of this was, like I said, to engage young people, engage the youth. So we had 2 so far. We might have the one in South, if not later on this month, maybe next year, because timing and challenges and getting places. But we had 2 national youth rallies, one at Queen's Hall and the other at Shore Park in Tobago, where we called out all the young people to come and be a part of the Gender Affairs Division's initiative to empower young people. We had a Sunshine. She's a character that we use to get people talking and having conversations about mental health, about themselves, about gender issues, and so on. We also had DMAD, who's a theater organization. They are really, really good, really brilliant, and they did many skits and so on. To empower young people, get them engaged and speaking about these issues of gender-based violence and so on. It was also really just simply a space for young people to be celebrated, and sometimes we forget that we need to celebrate and give back. It was also in collaboration with the Child Affairs Division, and they had two initiatives for Universal Children's Day, where they gave back to the young people, gave back to children. I spoke at the events. It was amazing for me. I said, I am so happy and fulfilled to see young people so happy, enjoying themselves, smiling, and not being in a position where they are oppressed and they're crying and they're sad. So it was a nice space. It was a good, necessary initiative to get the young people out, get them involved, get them listening also to and hearing all the different hotlines and the number violence if they are in need of help, how to shout and say no, ask for help, speak up if you need to speak up, and also to, like I said, providing that very comfortable, warm, friendly space where sometimes children don't have that at home. They don't have it in school. Home and school is sometimes very toxic, hostile environments for young people. So we wanted to bring them, to show them that simple thing as love and appreciation, and that goes such a long way. So we did that. And we also had on a different level, or a different scale, a different end, we launched something called the Men's Bureau, which the Gender Affairs Division had been working on for a while. It started with 2 working men's forum, one in Tobago, one in Trinidad. And I think it's so important that we continue to engage Tobago, Trinidad, and Tobago, and not leave them out. So the Men's Bureau was established and launched during the 16 days of activism, as a site, a tool, a mechanism where men can now come to speak about issues, where we can have actions, initiatives, activities, policies, and programs, and a safe space, most importantly, for men to be able to come and speak about issues they may have, their vulnerabilities, and for them to get that needed, necessary support. So we at the Office of the Prime Minister are not leaving men out. We are continuing, effortlessly continuing to do our work for women and girls, for victims and survivors of gender-based violence. But we are now providing or trying to open bigger more effective spaces where we could get men into the conversation, where we could hear men out, give them a voice, empower men so they could also live fulfilling, healthy lives.
I'm happy to know that there's balance. I'm happy to know that there's so much happening. And it leaves us now to have further conversation in the future to be able to expose and explore more of this and share with the general public so that they can also be a part of these great initiatives. Dr. Khan, your, I wouldn't say closing remarks, but what you would have liked to discuss, share with us some of the things that we did not have the time to discuss, but you can be able to put it in a snippet format that will still make it digestible and filling at the same time for us.
Okay. Well, first, let me say thank you so much, Geoffrey. Thanks to you and Futsal for having this event and for highlighting, placing a lens on this issue, especially during these 16 days of activism. I'm also really pleased to be sharing the stage, so to speak, with my fellow activist and advocate, Renelle. And I think this was a very productive conversation. And as you said, some of the things that we also wanted to discuss was the mental health impact of domestic violence, which is so insidious and far-reaching. Just those consequences alone are enough to want us to eradicate the issue of domestic violence, far less for all the other consequences on society. So in our next conversation, I'm hoping we can talk more about the mental health impact, the psychological impact, not just on direct victims, but the other victims. So whether it's children or other vulnerable people, other dependents in the household, and how it also has an impact on a larger society. Sometimes people think domestic violence is a personal issue. So it's just, between, it's married people business. That's what we say colloquially. And we don't mess in married people business. But no, this problem has an impact on communities and societies and our development. This is a barrier to us as a country attaining on our goals. And we've heard some of the other speakers speak about this in terms of human rights, etc. So I look forward to sharing some of that and to talking more about how often in our society we see trauma masquerading as norms and culture. As we culture, we see abuse masquerading as tradition, or abuse masquerading as that's how we do it. So we need to unpack some of that and start, reflecting on some of our practices that are harmful, that contributes to that misunderstanding of what domestic violence is and all the different forms it takes, and how it starts off small in many instances, and that creates this atmosphere of acceptedness. And so that leads to some of those results we heard about why people can't recognize, and not just school children and young girls, but many women are in relationships, many men are in relationships and don't recognize that it's unhealthy and dysfunctional and it's not normal. And as you pointed out, not everything that's normal is healthy. Normal speaks to something that occurs very often, yeah? But not everything that's occurring very often is healthy, as in the case of domestic violence. So I look forward to having those conversations. We spoke about the different layers of how we need to address this problem. And I just want to highlight something that's taking place with the CADV. And when we have our other conversation, we'll be able to talk about it. We are having a panel discussion, and it's called Centering Women in the State's Duty to Protect: Lessons from the Life of Samantha Isaac. And this is a panel discussion in collaboration with CAFRA. And the guest speakers on this panel are really important stakeholders. So we have the Attorney General. So Senior Counsel Reginald Armour is going to be speaking at this panel discussion. We also have Senior Counsel Douglas Menz, who is speaking as well. So we're going to hear more from that judicial and legal point of view about the state's duty to protect women. And then we also have Ms. Todd Lampkin, who is the mother of Samantha Isaacs, who tragically lost her life to domestic violence. But why is she Why is she singled out from all of these many cases? You mentioned the very tragic, horrendous case of Khalida Shamba and her mother earlier this year. Well, in that case, Ms. Todd Lampkin went forward with legal action against the state. And the judgment that was delivered by Justice Mohammed found that there was a failure among those who were responsible for protecting the rights of Samantha Isaacs. And so this panel discussion is going to uncover some of that, and it's going to point us to some of the gaps that we need to address. So we have gaps, as we said, in all these sectors, and it's really good to hear about the government's role in identifying these gaps and trying to take steps. But let us not forget that we are not calling this an epidemic because we want to we're not exaggerating. It is a massive problem. 1 in 3 women, as you said, it's only those who report. So there are many more women and victims who go underreported. So a massive problem deserves a massive solution, and it deserves a priority in our landscape. So I'm glad to hear that you'll be continuing these conversations beyond the 16 days of activism, because that's what we need to do. When this pandemic started, when COVID-19 pandemic started, there was a global response, a call to action, and they were able to get it under control. The problem of gender-based violence and domestic violence is insidious. While it is massive, it's unrelenting. So we don't get a break from it. And it's easy to become desensitized and think, well, that's how it is. But we can't. We cannot relent. We have to continue. And I really want to commend Futsal on efforts like these. These conversations are important. So I look forward to joining in the future.
When I got the email from Renelle, below her signature were 3 contact numbers. The team quickly took it and we generated this graphic from it, which is very important. See something, say something. These are the contact numbers, ladies and gents, when it comes to reporting any incident that you may be seeing when it comes to domestic violence. So we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 800-SAVE, that is 800-7283. You have the Children's Authority Hotline, 996 or 800-2014, and Childline, 131 or 800-4321. See something, say something. Ladies, an utmost pleasure it has been. Honestly speaking, at the beginning of the show, I didn't know where I was going to be, how we were going to navigate an hour, but it to God be the glory. It flew seamless, it flew organic. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. May God richly bless each one of your season's greetings to you and your families, and may you all have a bountiful 2025 as we continue to toil in our neck of the woods, in our part of the vineyards, to be able to make Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and the world a better and safer place. Until we see each other for 2025,
Yes.
Doc, Renelle, talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Guys, that has been episode 3 of Respecter. I know it's your lunchtime. I know we went overboard, but bear with us. It was important for us to be able to have this conversation. We really wanted to have it within an hour, but talk bring talk, as you people say, and what great talk we did have. As mentioned in episode 2, please be reminded that today we launch Respecter, the virtual run. Respecter Significance Medal is here. What a beautiful medal it is, guys. In its closed position on your left hand, you'll see it there. in the open position. Just slide and you'll see the full extent of the medal. Is a symbol to acknowledge and appreciate the importance of a woman. Emphasizes she has value, worth, and contributions that deserve recognition. As a reminder to us all to remember that to treat her with respect, consideration, and understanding. And I am going to tell you all that it starts with me as well. So, on behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, my name is Geoffrey Edwards. I want to say thank you very much for joining us on this amazing journey over the last 16 days as we brought to you the series Respect Her, our journey when it comes to activism against gender-based violence. Until we see you all next year, be blessed.